All right, welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about the practice test for solving quadratics B. This test is going to have two standards on it. I like to call this like the how to cheat the test video because I'm going to tell you everything I possibly can about how you can do well on this test. So looking at this first problem, it wants us to identify A, B, and C. Now remember, as long as your equation is equal to 0, you can just look at it and tell. Now this one's kind of unique because there's no value in front of the x squared, so we're always allowed to put a 1 in if that's the case. You could also put a 1 in right here if you needed to. Now remember, A is always the first one, B is the second one, and C is the third one. The important part to remember is the sign goes with it. So C is -3, B is +4, and A is a +1 since we don't see a sign there. Now, the reason we like to figure out what A, B, and C are is because we use them to find something we call the discriminant. Now, the discriminant, if you remember, this is a formula you're going to have to know, is B squared minus, actually I like to put parentheses on it, B squared minus 4 times A times C. Right, so that's why we needed to know the A, B, and C in order to be able to figure out these values. Now, when we figure out the discriminant, this is always going to end up being equal to a single number. And depending on what kind of number it is, it's going to tell us how many solutions we're going to have. So if the discriminant ends up being a positive number, then that means we are going to have 2 solutions. If the discriminant is equal to 0, which will happen as well, then the quadratic equation is said to have 1 solution. And finally, if the discriminant is negative, right? If you get a negative value, then the quadratic equation has 0 solutions, right? So those are kind of our 3 different options, 2, 1, and 0, and you just need to know which one gives you which answer. Now, looking at the next problem, it says calculate the discriminant and tell us if it has 2, 1, or 0 solutions. So right off the bat, they're telling us that A is 9, B is 6, and C is 1. So to do the discriminant, we need to do B squared minus 4 times A times C. So B in this problem is 6, so I'm going to have 6 squared minus 4 times A, which is 9, times C, which is 1. Now, all we need to do is come over to our calculator and type that in. Now, you want to be very careful when you type this in to use parentheses basically everywhere. Otherwise, you might get a slightly wrong answer. Now, we find here that our discriminant ends up being equal to 0. So if our discriminant is equal to 0, then we need to go back up to our list here, right? If the discriminant is 0, then the quadratic equation has 1 solution. So this will have 1 solution for us. Let's take a look at another one. Now this problem's slightly harder because in this problem they don't tell you what A, B, and C are. So we're going to have to figure that out ourselves. We're still going to be using the same formula though because they still want us to find the discriminant. So it's B squared minus 4 times A times C. Now remember, this is A, this is B, and this is C. So I'm going to have 3 squared minus 4 times 2. Now we just need to evaluate it. So coming on over, 3 to the second minus 4 times 2 gives us -23. So that's what we would put up here for where it's asking us for our discriminant. Now our discriminant in this one is negative. And if we go back up top here to that list that we kind of created earlier, if the discriminant ends up being negative, then it's going to have 0 solutions. So this one will have 0 solutions. We won't be able to find one. Now here's our last problem on this standard. So same thing, we're still finding the discriminant. So coming on over here, B squared minus 4 times A times C. Now, this one's tough, don't get me wrong. The reason why is it's not arranged for us. So we need to arrange it by getting everything onto the same side and getting it equal to 0. So I'm going to have 3x squared minus 7x plus 2 equals 0. That means A is equal to 3, B is equal to -7, and C is equal to a +2. So plugging this in, we're going to have our negative 7 squared minus 4 times 3 times 2. So let's evaluate this now. So evaluating, we punch it into our calculator. Negative 7 to the second power minus 4 times 3 times 2. Hitting enter, we get 25. And that would be our discriminant here. Now, since we got 25 and 25 is a positive number, that means we are going to have 2 solutions, just like we would have seen up above on that list. So that's your first standard, and honestly, I don't think that one's too bad. I think you should all do pretty well on that one. But if you're like, hey, I'm just missing on this, or I'm struggling, Block, can you help me out? Just let me know, and I'd be happy to. The other standard that you're going to have to use is the quadratic formula. So remember, this is that formula that is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. Now this is one that's really good to memorize. You should have this in your brain. You're going to need to know this today and further on in math. We're going to use this a lot. So for this first problem, it says select the quadratic formula that solves the equation. So we know that a is equal to 9, b is equal to 6, and c is equal to 1. So if I was trying to plug it into that formula, remember it's negative b to start. My b value is 6, so now it's going to be a minus 6, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so this is 6 squared, minus 4 times my a value, which is 9, times my c value, which is 1, and then this all gets divided by 2 times 9. So looking down here at the very bottom, actually on the next page, you have a couple sample formulas down here that you're going to be able to pull in on the test. So looking at this one, we should have a negative 6 out front. So looking at this, it looks like this is the only one with a negative 6. So we should actually just be able to check our answer with that and make sure everything's the same. And I think that's exactly what we have here. So I think we did this good. Now, once we have the quadratic equation filled out accurately, all we need to do is reduce it and simplify in order to solve. Now this one, we've already reduced it for you. So we've gotten this far, and we're just asking you to finish it up. So remember, we can take the square root of 25, and we know that, well, either we know or we don't know, but punching it in on our calculator, we'll get 5. So we can simplify to this point. Now to finish it off at this point, we simply need to just do 2 equations. So we're going to do 3 plus 5, which is 8, divided by 2, which is going to give us 4. And I put that in the spot where it said the positive answer because this one, or this answer was positive. Once we do that, then we're going to do it kind of the reverse way. So now we're going to do 3 minus 5. So 3 minus 5 would give us a negative 2. Negative 2 divided by 2 would give us a negative 1. And again, that answer is negative, so it's in the negative slot. Let's take a look at another one. So here's another one for us. It says select the quadratic equation that solves this. So coming over here, of course, this would be a 1. So a would be 1, b would be 9, and c would be a positive 6. So going into the quadratic formula, negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. Now coming over here, let's just plug in our values. So if I know b is negative 9, I'm going to put a negative 9 where the b was. I'm going to put a negative 9 where the b was. Now you're not going to see this on those answers to choose from because when they have a negative 9 here, they're going to make that into a positive 9, and when it's positive, they're not even going to show you that sign. Now, a in this problem is 1, so wherever we see an a, we're going to replace it with a 1. And c in this problem is 6, so I'm going to put a 6 right here. Now, once I got that once I got that far, we're in good shape at that point. Now, we're going to see, or this is where we're going to test your ability to actually simplify that. So let's try to do this all at once. So remember when we were doing this in the homework yesterday, we kind of just broke it down and did it in parts. So 2 times 3 would give us a 6 on the bottom. We're still going to have a negative 5 out front. Plus or minus still is there. And then we dealt with this part. Now remember, this is your discriminant right here, so we can just enter that in on our calculator. So coming over, 5 to the second power minus 4 times 3 times a negative 2 tells us that the inside number, what's inside the square root, is 49. Now if I take the square root of 49, I end up getting 7. So the square root of 49 was 7, so that means there is a 7 that needs to sit right here in this spot. So now we're just going to do our two problems. So we're going to do negative 5 plus 7 divided by 6. So negative 5 plus 7, hit enter first, and then divide that by 6. And we get 0.333, which we also know is, well, 2 divided by 6 would have also been 1/3, which is the same as that. So I don't know what we're going to have on the, or for the answer for you to select, but it'll be one of those two. And then we'll do negative 5 minus 7 divided by 6 will give us a negative 2. Now, one thing I'm already kind of worried about is just being very careful right here, making sure the positive answer goes here and the negative one goes there. Because if you flip-flop that, you're not going to get that answer right. All right. So we got a couple more problems over here. So on these, I mean, if you're going to be trying to do this, please make sure you have a separate sheet of paper for that test, because this is a hard problem to do without it. So it says use the quadratic formula to solve, round any decimal answers to the nearest hundredth. Okay, so here we go. Here's A, here's B, here's C. Our formula is negative B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4 times A times C all over 2A. Your job is to plug in those values right now. So anywhere I see an A, I'm going to put a 2. Let me just do it in a different color so we can see that plugged in. So there's an A here and an A here. Anywhere I see a B, I'm going to put a 5. So we're going to get rid of this, get rid of this. We're going to put a 5 here and a 5 here. And anywhere I see a C, I'm going to put a negative 1. Boom. Nice job. Now we need to evaluate this. So remember, when we do this, the first part doesn't change. The bottom we do combine, so we're going to make that into a 4. And then we take this kind of in parts. Let's first get this number, and then whatever that number is, we're going to square root it. So coming on over, we're going to have 5 to the second power minus 4 times 2 times negative 1. And we end up getting 33. Now technically, that 33 is still in the square root. So we want to square root 33. So second square root 33. And we end up getting 5.7. I think they want us to round to the nearest hundredth. So that's 2 spots. 5.74. Now, to finish this problem off, of course, we're just going to get our 2 answers. So we're going to take negative 5 plus 5.74. Negative 5 plus 5.74, and then divide that by 4 to get our first answer. Now that one's positive, so I'm going to put it in the positive slot of 1 or 0.185. Now let's get our second answer. So negative 5 minus 5.74, divide that by 4, and we end up getting negative 2.685. So negative 2.685. Now I'm just realizing we only needed to round to the nearest hundredth, so we should round these up. Since 5 is equal to 5, we're going to round that up to be 0.19. And then since 5 is equal to 5, we're going to round that up to be negative 2.69 as our 2 answers. All right, let's do one last problem together. This is the hardest quadratic formula one that I have for you. And the reason it's hardest is because it's not ready to go right now. Remember, we need it to be equal to 0 in order to be able to set this up to solve. So we're going to subtract 2 on both sides to get it equal to 0. We're going to be left with x squared minus 7x minus 2. Now, since we don't have a number in front of the x, we're going to put a 1 there. Remember, that's your a value. Negative 7 will be our b value, and negative 2 will be our c value. Now, plugging it into our quadratic, negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. So plugging this in. A is 1, so wherever I see an A, I'm going to put a 1. So 1 here, 1 there. B is negative 7, so I'm going to put a negative 7 where this B was, and I'm going to put a negative 7 where this B was. Now notice we have two negatives. Two negatives make a positive, and if it's a positive, we're not going to show it to you. So we're going to just make that into just 7 there. Last but not least, for the C, C is negative 2, so I'm going to put a negative 2 over here. So our first step to solving this, I'd say just do the easy part. So 2 times 1 is 2. Now let's punch all of this in our calculator. Let's get a number. Once we get that number, we're going to take the square root of it. So parentheses are very important here. Negative 7 to the second power minus 4 times 1 times negative 2. Hit enter. We get 57. That's the number that's inside the square root. So we're going to take the square root of 57, and we get 7.55. We're going to round that to the nearest hundredth. 9 is bigger than 5, so it rounds the 4 into a 5. Now let's get our two answers. 7 plus 7.55. Get that number, then divide it by 2. So our first answer, it looks like that's our positive one, is 7.28. We'll round that up. We're only going to the nearest hundredth, so since that 5 is bigger, or is equal to 5, I guess, it rounds 7 up to 8. Now let's do the minus. 7 minus 7.55. We get that number. Divide that by 2. We get negative 2.75. Again, that 5 is going to round that 7 into an 8. So negative 0.28 will be our two answers. And that's it, ladies and gentlemen. I think this test is also very doable, but there's some pieces you're definitely going to have to be careful on. The rest of today, you're going to be working on the pre-test. If you have any questions, make sure you're reaching out to me. I want to make sure this goes well for you guys the first time. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.